2024 series. I am Dr. Pierre Rogers, Director of the Axelson Center for Nonprofit Management here at North Park University in Chicago. And I'm sure many of you have been with us in the past, but let me remind you and give you our commercial about the wide range of nonprofit management education topics that we provide. So we do workshops, webinars, we do awards for nonprofit managerial excellence, we do custom training. We offer a boot camp for new nonprofit CEOs that's actually coming up this summer, July 31st through August 2nd. And this year, 2024, is the Axelson Center's 25th anniversary. And we are excited about the celebration that we're planning. First, we're holding a reception downtown at Provisio Partners that's located on Wells Street, right near the Chicago River. It's going to be on May 16th in the evening. And then our annual conference is coming up on October 18th, where we will be celebrating even more. The theme for that conference is More Than Money, Philanthropy, Fundraising, and Justice. And we're planning great speakers and breakout sessions for that conference. So today we're bringing you Sydney Freitag Fay, who is our presenter, and we are so excited to have him join us. He has been speaking with us for at least 10 years. But let me just say, over the past few weeks, we've been dealing with a range of topics about how to fundraise. But today we're shifting gears a bit to focus on the people behind the skill itself. And so we know there's a new generation of fundraising professionals. Demands are different, especially post-COVID. So the question is, what does it take now to get the right people, keep the right people, so they can cultivate the necessary relationships and raise the funds so your organization can do the work to address your mission? So Sydney has more than 18 years of resource development experience with expertise in the various areas of individual giving, in board relations and recruitment, in grant writing and prospecting, corporate sponsorship, as well as event planning, fundraising strategy, and marketing. He's currently the Director of Development and Marketing for Delta Institute, which is a $4 million organization that works with communities throughout the Midwest to solve environmental and economic needs. Sydney has worked in a range of roles, development director for a smaller nonprofit. He's been gifts officer and other development roles, Heartland Alliance, a number of other Chicago-based social service organizations. He's also a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Mongolia. He's been adjunct faculty at Loyola University in Chicago. And as I said, he's been a presenter with us at the Axelson Center for over a decade. He's a certified fundraising executive, which is really important in that world for those of you who are fundraising professionals. So Sydney will let you know how he prefers to handle questions, but do feel free to put them in a chat and we'll figure out whether they should be addressed in that moment or later on. So as you feel comfortable, we really appreciate when you have your cameras on. It does help speakers to be able to see your faces and just feel the energy. So let's get started. And Sydney, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction to everyone, Pierre. I sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, I've been partnering with the Axelson Center for a full decade now. Like, this is a year of wonderful milestones. I think the first time that I did a training was in 2014. So it's great having some time with all of you today. So rest assured, I had the opportunity to look at the attendee list for our session today. I see a lot of us are all fundraisers. And rest assured, pretty much every issue area that is being addressed, you know, when it comes to all the different titles that exist out there, I've had a good chunk of them. So the sort of that energy and that vibe that I'm sort of bringing to everyone today. So let's go ahead and talk about our agenda. So we've got 90 minutes together. I think it'll go by pretty quickly. As you can imagine, I am pretty extroverted and talkative, as are so many of us in our field. So we're going to be chunking out our section today in sort of basically threes, where we're going to have our first third around hiring fundraisers. You know, all of us have been through the hiring process. ourselves, maybe you've hired team members, maybe this is something that's on your radar for the years ahead. We'll sort of get into a wide array of best practices for you to consider as appropriate for your organization. Second chunk of time will be retaining fundraisers, just really focusing on that retention, because attrition, as we know from both donors and staff, is incredibly expensive. So, and then last but not least, let's talk about retraining, because I know for myself personally, over these past 3, 4, 10 years, there's been a lot of relearning that I've had to do in order to make sure that I'm doing the very best possible storytelling and engagement for my donor base and also for my colleagues and board. So with that, we've got an array of different objectives today. I'd love to hear from all of you in the chat. If you have any other objectives that you want to make sure that we address, please go ahead and add them in when you feel comfortable. If you also want to sit with things for a moment too, chat's available to you throughout the entire session. Please also feel free to raise your hand and all sorts of good stuff. So anyway, basically our objectives is I want to help everyone here, because all of us are doing awesome work, about how to attract fundraisers that make the most sense for you, around how to bring the right people through your front door, and then how to keep them. And then again, how we all can evolve to do our work at a deeper level, since so much has changed over the past several years. And then if there is anything else that you want to make sure that we reference, please drop in a chat. We can keep it as parking lot, or I'll try to pepper it in real time, and the amazing Axelson Center staff will make sure that I don't miss anything either, because I certainly can get distracted and tangential at times. So with that, one other caveat, or actually that's a fib, I've got several caveats. If you have any super specific questions, please don't hesitate emailing me. I include my Gmail on the very last slide of our presentation today. And there's been lots of times at Axelson Center trainings where there may be a super duper uber specific need that you have that may also be a little bit confidential. You can absolutely email me after today's session. I promise I won't disappear. And so my last caveat is, one thing that I'm absolutely going to promise each of you is that this is going to be a very honest discussion. It's going to be very real, it's going to be very authentic, and it's going to be based in a lot of lived experience, not just from me, but from a wide array of consultants who I pay attention to, leaders in the industry, and also, incredibly important, the dozens and dozens of fellow fundraisers who I've been privileged enough to work with throughout my career. So rest assured, some of these recommendations, you may be like, ooh, well, let me think about that in 6 months. That is totally fine, because you are doing so much work. There's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much that we all can do. And your mileage may vary. That acronym YMMV, you're going to see that peppered throughout the slides, because here's the thing. I don't know all of the ins and outs to your donor culture, to your board, to your organization's impact. So please consider these recommendations and these suggestions in our time together today, and then how you can apply it to your organization to really hit home the impact, to reduce your stress, to just take less time when it comes to a wide variety of staffing needs, and honestly, to have more space for yourself. So that's really my hope for today, is to give everyone more breathing room and space and grace. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our first topic of the day. And again, just as a reminder, please definitely add into chat any questions that you have, anything that comes on your radar. Very happy to respond to folks. But let's talk about hiring those fundraisers. So again, we all likely have been hired for a fundraising position, and so we know what our own job search looked like. We also know all of the usual sort of suspects that we look at when it comes to finding fundraisers. When it comes to the AFP for both the Chicago chapter and then also national, when we look at different nonprofit clearinghouses like those listed, and then certainly LinkedIn. LinkedIn has actually become way more relevant when it comes to active canvassing of candidates since COVID. When it comes to like adding like the little like we're hiring emblem that goes over your cute little circle on your profile, when it comes to like, just promoting the great work that you're doing. One thing that I'll say about LinkedIn, and I see this happening all the time, is hey, we're hiring. Here's the position. But one thing that I don't always see in LinkedIn when people are hiring is what the like value and opportunity is of the organization itself. So like when you looked at organizations' LinkedIn profiles, you may see like 4 posts in a row around a specific job opening. Consider staggering out your job opening to really get into like those success stories, into those impact metrics, into why the fundraising work is so crucial for your organization. I guarantee you that it will ping a personal passion for a potential job candidate if they can just see interspersed with the job posting and all those logistics, all the great work that you're doing. And then, of course, social media, but I also am going to give a caveat about social media writ large. There has been a lot of conversation in the nonprofit sector around what specific channels are trustworthy these days. So just as I say that LinkedIn provides, a lot of opportunity to gain candidates, you may not necessarily post your job posting on all channels. You may decide, for example, that Twitter/X may not be a channel that you wish to engage when it comes to your job postings. Again, your mileage may vary, but I just wanted to throw that out there just from a spirit of transparency with y'all. And then last but certainly not least, referrals. Getting those referrals, whether it's former coworkers who've worked with, who you had great working relationship, and you'd love for them to come to your current place, even engaging your board. Like, who among your board has like someone that is in their network that could be a great fit for you? The closer that you can be to your candidates, absolutely the better. And then I definitely don't have all of the answers, so I'd love to hear from all of you. Could you share in chat where else you've posted or promoted, your positions to attract new fundraising staff? I'd love for everyone to be able to learn from each other a bit. So please go ahead and dive in. So let's talk about postings. When it comes to transparency really is the biggest thing when it comes to the posting itself. Again, your mileage may vary, but being very candid and real about where your organization is at and what you need is crucial. Please don't surprise anyone during the interview process. It'll just sow distrust. Try to be as reasonably candid as possible when it comes to sort of what your needs are for the year ahead, when it comes to all the different hopes and aspirations and dreams, because you really want to excite your fundraisers, and also you don't want anyone to feel as though you've pulled the rug out from underneath them if you've perhaps saved a not super happy learning. But anyway, I'll actually get into that a little bit more, so I won't eat my own lunch here. Just want to give a shout out to everyone in the chat, for just sort of adding in your wisdom. Folks, please feel free to engage with each other, make chat friends, follow up with each other after our session a day, because it periodically can feel like a little bit a little bit of distance when it comes to the screen. Would definitely like to have a fostered network of attendees today. But anyway, one thing that actually two things that I'll touch upon when it comes to the posting. I can't emphasize enough that salary and compensation in the job description is essential. That's becoming more and more standard where you list the salary range. And it also is an issue of equity, because really just making sure that you're very crystal clear around what your resources are for the position, you're going to save some time. Just from a very nuts and bolts perspective, if you have your salary range in there, you're not going to have someone whose salary floor is 20,000 more than your ceiling, Like you're not going to be spending the time reviewing their resume and phone screening them. Just as a quick story, I once was hiring for a position that I was vacating. And I was basically a foundation relations manager. And the position at that time, this was, about, 15 years ago at this point, when I was leaving, I was making 43,000. And I would see people applying for my position and their prior salaries were 65, 90. And I would just look at these like folks being like, oh man, we're wasting their time. And then when it came to the phone screen, it was sort of awkward for me to then say, yeah, like the salary range is, not what you're looking for. So just lead with the salary and compensation is becoming more and more standard. We do that at Delta Institute. It's been very helpful for us. I know that careers and nonprofits now have that salary line on all of their postings, and also AFP does the same. And then I'll keep on touching upon this throughout today's session, but just really, oh, awesome. Thank you, Jesse, for including that in chat. I did forget that the state of Illinois did pass legislation around mandating the salary range, which I think will actually be very helpful for job seekers and job posters alike. So let's be ahead of the curve and let's do it before we're all required to do so. Um, and then one other thing that often can be perhaps diminished in job postings is we get into all the logistics around what you're going to be doing, the salary, start date, etc. Make sure that you include like genuine impact, like the genuine benefit of your organization within the job posting to get people excited where it's like, wow, I'm going to help those like 4,000 elementary school students get to grade level reading. Like that's incredibly motivational for all of us fundraisers to know exactly what the efforts that we're doing is going to fund. And then any organizational North Stars. So for example, my organization, one of our North Stars is authentic equity. And we make sure that we really emphasize authentic equity in our external communications. So that way job posters know that this is something that we all are collectively working toward. So let's talk about some red flags. So again, your miles may vary. You're going to hear me say that a few more times. Please take me with like a large grain of salt, 2 cents, etc. But being real, I think that these are some reasonably commonplace red flags when it comes to the fundraisers looking at your job description. So when I look at a job posting, a red flag for me is just really that mismatch between what's being offered and what's being requested, because there may not be like a direct one-to-one, but generally speaking, we want to be within the same like ballpark. So I give an example on the slide of sort of, when I see like a job posting out there that has just sort of like this whole laundry list of like, director level responsibilities, and it may be a salary that's more at like the coordinator or associate level, that's usually a red flag because that can indicate sort of expectations that may not be achievable at the organization, and it may even speak a little bit to organizational culture. When it comes to like, current financial and board circumstances, I think that so many of us, when we look at potential employers and impact opportunities, usually the questions that I ask are around, is your most recently audited financials available online? And then I review them. I like knowing the organizational budget. I like knowing about any deficits that there may be. And I also like knowing about the board and just sort of general like board circumstances, whether it's term limits, or just asking the, hiring professional, how would you describe your board? So being able to describe those things and provide them to fundraisers, I think is just so essential. And I think that a lot of us would agree with that because none of us like being surprised. Case in point, I got a quick little like moment of baggage that I'm going to share with y'all. So I was hired for a position at a former employer. And when I was going through the hiring process, I was like, so let's talk about your financials. And the executive director during the hiring process was like, well, we have a deficit. And I'm like, well, yeah, like many nonprofits have operating deficits. Like, that's kind of, something that happens routinely in our sector. I'm like, well, how big is the deficit? Like compared to like, your annual revenue? And during the interview process was like, oh, maybe like around like, 5-8%. I'm like, okay, like 5-8%. I've been in that situation many times before. You never want to have a deficit, but sometimes it happens. So I get hired and I reviewed like the prior audited financials. Turns out that the annual deficit was 43% between expenses to revenue, and that deficit had arisen in the most recent fiscal year, which was not covered by the online audited financials. And I found that reality out on my 4th day. So as you can imagine, I kind of didn't trust my CEO or my employer for the rest of the time that I was there. And I was there for about 18 months, just being very transparent with you all. So anyway, I can't emphasize enough, transparency docs. You're welcome to check out sort of, again, your miles may vary. You're welcome to check out what, I do at my current company. We have our transparency section with all of our transparency documents, ranging from, the annual reports to our audits to our current organizational budget. Just having all of that online, I think, is just a really great best practice to foment that trust. So again, consider what makes the most sense for your company, but that's definitely something that I would encourage you all to please consider. And, go ahead and add in a chat. If you have transparency sections or like, sections of your website that, include like, financial documents or strategic plan or just overall governance materials, I'd love to see some links. So please go ahead and add in a chat like links to your own organization and any transparency documents that you have online, just because I think that we can all look at different formats and ways that we share who we are. So go ahead and do so if you feel comfortable. And if you don't, I also totally understand. So, all right, let's talk about red flags for you, the hiring agent and the employer. So awesome. Just want to do like a quick like shout out of love and appreciation for folks adding in links in the chat. I really appreciate you all. Okay, doke. So let's talk about red flags when it comes to talking to a fundraiser. We obsess over numbers as a sector, and we definitely need to talk to numbers. But also at the same time, just really having those like examples of how we were able to enact positive change within like our donor base. So like I always like giving examples. And I love hearing examples where it's like, yeah, when I was hired, there was like board member A. And they shared with me when I first was hired that like they felt kind of disconnected and they weren't really able to attend a lot of meetings. They didn't really know what was going on. And they were just kind of like, on the roster. And they were giving like $5,000 a year. But through like, engagement, like, going to their office, like, following up with them after meetings that they weren't able to attend, they reported back to me that they felt more involved and their giving actually increased to 20,000. That's the kind of success stories that I think are really compelling when we think about the value add that we have as, fundraising professionals, because we're in the relationship business, being very blunt. We cultivate and foster relationships. We come up with like, sort of the ways to engage folks. I always love to hear that from someone who's considering joining the team. So, and that sort of like also speaks to like, we want to like have a focus on the money, but we don't want the money to be the only thing that we focus on. And I'd also say that if, an employer is only asking about dollars and cents, that also could be a potential red flag. And then, just really making sure that we as nonprofit workers really center, inclusion and equity, and just, are very cognizant and mindful of a wide variety of realities facing our sector and our society. I think that's another thing that's always helpful to hear from nonprofit professionals. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in the retraining section. So I want to pause for a moment. Any questions that folks wish to pepper in the chat? Any questions that you wish to share verbally, please go ahead and raise your hand. I'd also just like to hear from folks, if you feel comfortable, about any lived experience with hiring fundraisers. So I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and go ahead and add in a chat or raise your hand if you feel comfortable. Okie doke. Well, we'll go ahead and continue, but you can always come back with any questions that you have throughout the rest of the session and we'll address them. So retaining fundraisers, once you have someone awesome, let's keep them. And by the way, I actually forgot to say this during my preamble, because my preamble today was a little bit longer than my usual preamble. I like using images of caffeine and sugar when I talk about fundraising, because so often fundraising and caffeine, or fundraising and, sugary carbs, can go really well together. I know it was really dangerous for me when I was working at Ogilvy and I was right above the French market. So, I kind of lean into that a little bit when it comes to my visuals. So that's why you see stuff like the donuts before you. So, okay, let's talk about this number. So this number is actually pretty big. And based upon research done by Penelope Burke before COVID, she found, which by the way, if you aren't familiar with Penelope Burke, she's been a long-term career fundraiser, thought leader. I've really enjoyed a lot of her writings, so definitely check her out. But as you can see, her research found that the direct and indirect costs of finding a development director was just under 130,000. This was before COVID. So I would almost hazard to say that this has been upped in the most recent years, between inflation, between just the new realities of how we work. It may be closer to 140, 150 at this point, but I don't want to wildly speculate. But I share this with you because there is a very clear expense to all of us leaving our organizations early. Depends upon what consultant or what, fundraiser who has a new book out and sort of what they say. But, you may see from some fundraising consultants that, the average tenure of a fundraiser is around 9 months. Others have said that it's around 14 months. One thing that I have not seen is that the average tenure of fundraisers is 4 years or more. So when we think about tenure, it's a really big issue for our sector specifically, the nonprofit fundraising professional. And so again, your mileage may vary. I don't know all of the great organizations who are joining us here today. There may be parts of this that are exactly what, you would immediately nod your head at and be like, yes, that's definitely an issue for us. Or it may be something where it's yeah, no, we used to have that issue. It no longer is. So just wanted to sort of throw that out there. But this is sort of generally a smorgasbord of different reasons that are commonly cited, whether in nonprofit PRO, whether in Chronicle of Philanthropy or AFP. These are sort of the circumstances that cause fundraisers to leave. So let's dive into a smattering of them a little bit deeper. I can't emphasize enough the board. The board has been the most common reason why I have left an organization personally. When it comes to, governance, there's only so much that we ourselves are able to manage when it comes to board governance. So just really cast a keen eye on your governance policies. And if this is maybe a conversation that you need to have, with your CEO and the board, or if you are a CEO joining us today, that you have with your board as well, good governance practices just benefit an organization from top to bottom. And awesome. Just want to say thank you in the chat around adding in data tracking. That is another huge issue. I'll actually circle back on that a little bit. That's a great addition, and I wholeheartedly agree. So back to board. Lack of good governance, I think, is just paramount to do our very best as fundraisers to move the needle on. And then, there can also be along with it where it's fundraising is our job, it's the staff's job, we don't need to participate in it. And we can get into like board give and get and board like relations, for hours and hours on end. I'd actually really suggest all of you consider, if you haven't had the opportunity to do so already, a long-term Axelson Center presenter. Her name is Mary Morton. She does presentations on board governance consistently. I've attended her trainings. They are fabulous. So she will really give you an amazing 101 overview of board governance if that's an area that you really want to dive into. Again, she is just chef's kiss. So definitely check her out. So yeah, with the board, let's segue into the next piece, which is unrealistic expectations. Like, oh my gosh, I would imagine nearly all of us have operated under unrealistic expectations before, where you're told that within your first year, you need to increase corporate giving partnerships by 48%. Or that you need to bring in the first major gift from an individual donor of 50,000 plus within your first 6 months. That is such burnout. Like, it's just such fatigue inducing. It makes a lot of us leave. And then again, talked about this before on the prior slide, so I won't belabor it, but hidden or obscured financial needs is another area that folks really struggle with and leave. And then the donor culture, because depending upon the fundraiser who's coming through your door, they may be an absolutely amazing, talented fundraiser, but it may not be a great fit with members of your donor culture. And that's a very deliberate conversation that you need to have as the hiring agent. I'll give an example. Let's say that there's an amazing fundraiser who has a personal history around substance use, and they're living sober, and it's amazing for them. And maybe you have a wide array of adult beverage companies that are represented on your board or that are in your donor base giving leadership level gifts. That may not be a safe or healthy space for that fundraiser to operate. And that's just something to really have in the back of your mind. So I want to get to data tracking, because data tracking is so huge, and that is often one of the things that most nonprofits spend the least amount of money on. Like, I am very guilty of this, where I talk to Blackbaud and I'm just like, okay, no, I cannot afford Razor's Edge. Let's talk about a lower price point. And you need the data to be able to tell your story. And you need the data to be able to show those year-over-year returns, and to also be able to articulate your success both as a professional and as an organization. So love that inclusion. If there are other reasons that we haven't covered today around why fundraisers leave, please go ahead and add into the chat, or also raise your hand. I'd love to hear from folks, so that way we all have our shared wisdom together. Love it. Okay, let's do a quick safe space moment. I've been talking kind of at all of you for about 40 minutes at this point. We've already covered a lot of stuff that is kind of vaguely maybe unhappy-ish because, like, we talk about red flags, we talk about unrealistic expectations. You know, I just wanted to share with you all that I know that this seems like a lot. It seems like a lot to me too. I do feel very sincerely that these are just really essential considerations, things to consider as you continue your work both at your current employer and at future employers. When you're going through the hiring process for yourself or bringing on new team members, because I don't want, you and your organization to be paying that 127,000 like every, 14, 16, 9 months or so. It just is a lot. So, but I just really feel that we all will breathe deeper and sleep easier if we sort of just make sure that we retain our fundraisers to the very best of our ability. And I think that we can do so by sort of having, this sort of like checklist, you know, magical fundraiser syndrome. You know, what I mean by that is, hey, our organization has like a 20% annual operating deficit, and we've had it for the past 3 years. And our endowment is suffering as a result. And, we're stagnant and like blah, blah, blah. And it's just like a whole laundry list of stuff. And it's like, and we're going to hire that one person who's going to deliver us into Shangri-La. And everything will be amazing after that one person joins us. That's what I mean by magical fundraiser, that no one is able to be that amazing magical unicorn. And I would also argue that that can even veer perhaps into like a little bit of like extractive principles if we sort of rest like an entire organization's financials upon one person. So please know, I have been there. I have been that magical fundraiser who was hired to do all this different stuff. I remember doing like the 55-hour weeks and just feeling as though like the emails would never end and that the financial reconciliation would never end and that the audit would never end. So as much as we can avoid playing into that, both as practitioners and as hiring professionals, because when I hire staff members, I try my very best to make sure that my expectations of them are realistic, and I am not perpetuating onto them what was perpetuated and placed upon my shoulders previously. Anyway, if I talk more about magical fundraiser syndrome, I'm probably going to need a glass of Pinot Grigio. So let's go ahead and move on. Just that transparency. Again, I can't emphasize enough transparency when it comes to the job posting, the hiring process, the onboarding process, just being very candid about what realities you're facing, around what your pain points are, around, just what your hopes and dreams are. Because we want to strike a right balance. Like we want to be like transparent, but we also don't want to be scary. And, just sort of like, making sure that we have that blend of like, okay, these are our needs, but then these are our exciting opportunities. This is what our hopes and dreams are. This is what our vision is. And this is how we'll collaborate together. So just something that I wanted to make sure that I spoke to. And then, yeah, again, you can see where I have board of directors listed in here. You're going to see board peppered throughout these slides. That's very, very deliberate because it's all well and good if we, as the hiring professionals, bringing in new fundraisers, are very mindful about expectations, but we have those board reports and we have those board meetings that we do. So as much as we can, provide that point of education when it comes to our board around what makes the most sense and around what is most appropriate, the better I feel that all of our lives will be. So, whew, okay. It's like, let's have a minute, There's been a whole bunch of to-do list items. Let's talk about the to-do list of the person that you're hiring. So when it comes to, again, the job posting and the hiring process, and then the onboarding period, is essential to be very mindful of everything that we are discussing, and then also sort of like what the goal setting looks like. So as much as you can have different goals in the job posting, the better. And then when it comes to the onboarding session, which, I would say that most onboarding, like you're going to have like, a lot of like front loaded like meetings. You're going to have a lot of like, this is our CRM system. This is how we use it. This is sort of where our data gaps may be. This is our annual report. This is what we'd like to do with our annual report next year, blah, 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 blah. Usually like you've got, 2 weeks, where it's a lot of intensive meetings. And over the first like maybe 3 months, you then pepper it in with like all those good like check-ins, making sure that they have, the information that they need, so on and so forth. That is one thing that I also really just want to share with y'all. If you do not have a reasonably sort of like formalized onboarding period for new staff, I substantially recommend that you put that on the radar. Just thinking about like what conversations they need, what systems you need to walk them through, but then having those check-ins. Because when you describe and explain something for the first time to someone, they're only going to remember a fraction of it. So there just needs to be that repetition. Anyway, one question that I get from board, from CEOs, from other nonprofits who are hiring, where it's like, what does the revenue load look like? I mean, this is a very like, numbers-based question. So let's just like, acknowledge that like a numbers-based approach is not the full picture. And so that's why I have like, your mileage may vary, like, qualifier, and sort of like, a general ballpark for fundraiser performance. But, after a period of time, which many consultants recommend as being 18 months. So you can already see a very fundamental tension, because in prior slides, with nonprofit PRO, they're quoted as saying that the average retention period is 16 months. And here it's like you need 18 months to really begin ratcheting up your revenue. That explains so much of the different tensions that we see within our sector. We get pushed out, or we feel pushed out, before we begin having that really demonstrable impact. It takes some time. I forget which specific like thought leader it was, but we were talking about major gifts and about securing your first major gift, however so defined by the organization, whether it's 10,000 or 25,000, securing that first major gift from someone maybe giving you $100 in your annual fund, that's 18 months. It is 18 months between the $100 in the annual fund and then all this cultivation and all this engagement to then get to that 18-month period where that donor is emotionally, psychologically prepared to invest at a deeper level in your work. So I just really wanted to spend a bit of time talking about that, because this explains so much of sort of that churn and burn that we see in the nonprofit sector. And we're not going to advance to where we want to be with that churn and burn. But anyway, I digress. You can see sort of my, recommendations, suggestions, etc. But I'd like to hear from all of you. We've got a lot of amazing professionals in today's workshop. So go ahead and drop in a chat. What do you look for when it comes to success from your fundraisers, or from yourself if you are a mighty team of one? I just love to hear sort of like, how you define success. Again, I've got a very numbers-based approach on here, so let's add in that grain of salt. But drop in a chat if you feel comfortable about what you look for regarding success. So while people add into the chat different success metrics, and thank you to those who are, um, I just wanted to like have again a little pause. When we think about shared responsibility, because so many of the slides thus far, we've been talking about, you know, all of the different actions and all of the different things that we do, that our team does. Let's broaden the lens a minute and just talk about that shared responsibility. Because so often the metaphor that I like to use for the, sort of prototypical director of development position is that we're air traffic controllers. We sync between, our CEOs and the board, or with like donors or with grant funders, and just like really sort of like having, that interplay that we manage. And that takes shared responsibility. So when you think about different conversations that you may have on the radar, from your own lived experience, from maybe like, some of the recommendations today, when you think about those follow-up conversations with your CEO, with your board, you know, please pepper in, as I know that we all are, that shared responsibility approach, just because we can't have a magical unicorn fundraiser. It just doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and pause again. Questions about retaining fundraisers, or if you wish to share lived experience about retaining fundraisers working for you. Feel free to add in a chat, or also you can raise your hand and let's take you off mute. I'll have a sip of my coffee because fundraising and caffeine goes great together. Also just wanted to flag in chat, great wisdom. When we think about success, it's not just about getting those people in, but it's also about retaining, through our relationships and through our engagement. So just appreciation for that blend between retention rate as well as new donors. And in order to be able to come up with that, you gotta have good data tracking. So just a shout out to prior shared wisdom. Thank you all. Okay. Well, we're about to embark on sort of like the final chapter of our time today. So when we talk about, the entire spectrum of bringing people in and then retaining them, we should also talk about our baggage. so, so yes, let's be real with each other. It's been a lot over the past several years. Like, it's been like actually a lot. So when it comes to like everything that we all have lived through, like there's very real like trauma, like within ourselves, within like our colleagues, within our constituents and clients, you know, living through COVID, post-COVID economic circumstances. There has been a lot. So when we think about sort of where we are today and where we've been, we just need to acknowledge that there may be things that once was real, like 10 years ago, that no longer is real. And please rest assured, I'm in the exact same boat as every single person in this workshop, because I have my mindset where I'm like, okay, well, if I think about like retention rates, I need to make sure that I hit this retention rate and at this certain level, and I need to have like new donor conversion at X amount. And then that is perhaps no longer real based upon the realities of what we're living in. And I'll get into more of that in a little bit. But, when it comes to what this means for all of us as amazing fundraising professionals doing great work, it just takes so much more time. and so much more energy, whether it's individual donors or it's institutional donors. The methods may be very different, but when we look at the conversion rates, and when we look at the time to convert or the time to bring in that first gift or confirm the second gift, it's just a lot. And when we talk about various hallmarks within the 501c3 sector, when we talk about equity, you know, equity for many years sort of meant those warm and fuzzy words on a website. And for many, organizations, there still are a good chunk of warm and fuzzy words. But when we think about sort of where we are today, again, your mileage may vary, but I'm getting a lot more questions from my donors around what those warm and fuzzy words actually mean. What are we actually doing as a nonprofit to address legacy and current social ills as directly aligned to our mission? And then we have to give those very specific examples. So again, you're welcome to check me out when if you still have the link up for my transparency section from previous, you're welcome to look at my organizational website. We have a whole section on our equity efforts. So I normally would drop in the link, but I've got so many windows open right now. I don't want to accidentally click the wrong thing and then leave, the webinar. But just consider that all of us as nonprofit professionals, we have a vested stake and interest to making sure that authentic equity manifests in our work. When we think about our clients, when we think about our constituents, when we think about our communities that we are fortunate enough to partner in, we need to be prepared to speak to that at a deeper level. I'll talk about this again in 2 or 3 slides. And then when it comes to those donors and what they're looking for, it's been really interesting for me as a long-term fundraiser. I used to get all these very specific transparency questions from institutional donors in particular, in my grant proposals, where you get into your governance, you get into your background, you get into your protocols and policies and all those different pieces. I now have individual donors asking that too. And this is a little bit I try not to get shook when I think about this, but I get my board asking more and more. And it used to be where board directors maybe didn't ask as many questions about different governance policies. So just consider all those different pieces too when it comes to the context around sort of our retraining, relearning, unlearning, all those different pieces. So, and then the last thing that I'll say about this slide is when you get told by very well-intentioned people where it's, oh, well, what did our historical trends used to be in 2017 or 2015? Honestly, at least for me and my organization and organizations I know very well, our history is exactly that. It's history. It's something good to sort of have on the radar, but it's not necessarily as applicable anymore. So let's talk about some of the pain points. This is a little bit individual giving focused, but this does manifest in some of the other realities that we're addressing as a fundraising sector. I'm not going to get into all this, and I'm not going to read it because no one likes having PowerPoint slides read to them. That's just a universal shared experience. But when we look at the raw data of what we're seeing in the sector, individual giving today is not the same as what it was a decade ago, period. historical trends. This is all from like the majority of this is all from Giving USA, and I apologize if you already are very familiar with Giving USA. I don't mean to mansplain. Long story short, Giving USA is put out by the Lilly Center of Philanthropy in Indiana. They first started evaluating private giving in the 60s. And what they have found is that over the past several years, we have had literally historic decreases. So I mean that to say that what used to work doesn't really work anymore. So when you think about retraining your staff, your colleagues, when you also think about retraining your own frontal lobes, and we think about like what we've done in yesteryear, just really putting that asterisk beside it, where it's like, okay, that was yesteryear. I'm not going to have the same return on a direct mail appeal. I'm not going to have the same return on sending out like 10 cold LOIs to different private foundations. Your writing is just as compelling today as it was yesterday, but the sector and our society are different. I'd love to hear from folks. I know that's a little bit challenging when you're looking at a screen and you've got like, this random dude with like, reflections in his reading glasses and stuff. And like, you sort of maybe don't feel as though you're right there in the minute. And you may like, second guess if you want to share something. I really encourage you to share. I'd love to hear in chat or with any like, raised hands. What other changes have you seen in giving? I give sort of a smorgasbord of examples when it comes to individual giving, but I'd love to hear from folks. What have you seen change in your institutional donors, your event attendees, and your board? Consider if you're comfortable just sharing any changes that you've seen in recent years. In the chat, raise your hand. I'm going to have a quick drink of water. Something comes on your radar, you are always well. Oh, great. Awesome. Uh, Thank you so much to all you wonderful people peppering your wisdom in. So let's go ahead and take a minute and address some of the great stuff that's in here. And I did get a chance to address something in chat that was raised a little bit earlier. So when we think about skill sets, I'm just going to go top to bottom when it comes to chat. When it comes to skill sets and sort of what we screen for when it comes to our fundraiser candidates, just again, really thinking about your donor base and really thinking about what very specific skill sets you need, because there's storytelling, for example, but when it comes to the example in chat, if you are primarily institution-based, you're going to need that keen writing skill. You're maybe not going to emphasize as much like, the talky talk, like what I'm doing right now. So just having that like, clarity around the job description and just really screening your candidates through that very intentional lens and then having that manifest in their day-to-day is just so crucial when it comes to, making sure that folks stay longer rather than not. I'll give a quick example. I had a team of 4 people at one time. And I had the one person who their personality, they were a writer, they were backstage, and I knew I am never going to put them like in front, like face to face with, general public. They were a writer. So they were in charge of our grants. They did like our corporate partnership setups on the back end. They did an amazing job. If I had put them in the same role as another colleague of mine who they were so gregarious, they were so charming, like they could just really seal the deal. And in some ways, like, they were able to land things that I wasn't able to land at that time. If I had switched the responsibilities, chaos would have reigned. So just wanted to thank the chat about the reference to like, grant writing skills. And want to like share when it comes to like grants-based fundraising. So yes and no when it comes to seeing an increase in grants-based fundraising. I have seen an increase in more deliberate grants investments. So like a good example is the arts. So during COVID, like especially like 2020 through like I'd say like 2022-ish, if we have any like arts organizations in the room with us today, please add in when I go astray. It's been a little while since I've done arts fundraising, but I would see foundations saying, due to COVID, theaters are closed, their revenue is drying up, we need to throw them a lifeline. So all of our giving is going to the arts right now. Generally speaking, like that was an example of an increase. Generally speaking, what I personally have seen is I've seen more competition. Like as we have individual gifts decrease, for some organizations, that's the lion's share of their giving. So when they look at like their gaps, like if they're not able to bank on like that $10,000 donor giving at that same level anymore, they're going to look to grants. And I also have seen some decreases in my grants donors, and the example that I'm about to give blends like 3 different donor types. So I just want to put that caveat out there. I have a foundation who it's a foundation of 1. So it's kind of a major donor, kind of a foundation. I submit a formal proposal to them like every single year. I submit a formal report to them. So the mechanics are foundation, but the giving approach is very major donor. In that, the donor was very candid and was like, hey, my investments have decreased below X amount. I need them to be above X amount. And don't get me wrong, X amount was more money than I will ever see personally in my lifetime. But they cut back their giving because they want to get back to that level. And the gift that we were receiving from them was below 10,000. And I saw a 50% decrease. I don't feel that my 50% decrease is going to help them get to that X amount, but that's the reality. So take that for what it's worth. Your miles may vary, but I just wanted to speak to that a little bit. And then thank you, Jen. I agree completely when it comes to direct mail. Let's just talk very briefly about direct mail because the vast majority of us are all long-term like fundraisers. Direct mail, there's sort of like the duality implications when it comes to direct mail. And if I miss something, please add it into chat. Because direct mail, there's, the COVID change where individual giving sector-wise is decreasing, but then there's also, of course, the generational change. Because when we look at like the millennial generation, which is now the largest proportion of like working age Americans are now within the millennial category, millennials respond very differently to solicitations than the silents, the greats, the boomers. And there is no reason to believe that Gen Z, as they begin going off to college and then getting their first job, there's no reason to believe that they aren't going to give very differently either. So direct mail is definitely a very flux right now. And I also agree completely. I've been doing more bequests and planned giving work. So for what it's worth, your miles may vary. I actually talk about this every single year at the CEO nonprofit boot camp that the Axelson Center puts on. I'm going to put in a quick plug. Axelson does an amazing boot camp for CEOs. So if you are a CEO, if you're thinking about becoming a CEO, definitely mark your calendars for this summer. If you have enjoyed listening to me, you'll be able to see me again. I'll talk about very different stuff. If you maybe haven't enjoyed seeing me, well, I promise to be more engaging. So anyway, at my boot camp training that I give, I always talk about planned gifts. And my feedback to every single nonprofit is if you aren't spending some time on planned gifts, you are leaving money on the table. There is a whole new demographic and population who are retiring and who are thinking about their long-term legacy and their estate planning. So it can be just including in your annual reports, like a very brief overview of what a planned gift would mean. Having, very general copy and paste language for wills on your website. It doesn't have to be this in-depth thing. It can be something very digestible. So Jen, just wanted to thank you for bringing up planned giving because folks, if you're not doing planned gifts, please do so. And then, yep, I completely agree. Event attendance is definitely down and there's less giving overall. So with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and continue. But thank you all for taking a beat with me because I want to make sure you got your money's worth from our time together today. And let's talk about some very specific retraining pieces. So I've got a couple of slides that are a little bit like topic specific. And please rest assured, every one of these slides could be a full 2-hour plus presentation themselves. So my apologies in advance for giving you hopefully a heavy appetizer rather than just a light appetizer. But let's talk about equity and inclusion from a fundraising lens specifically. So I'm not going to read this slide, but this is all very real fundraising implications that I've been working within since 2020, and even beforehand. It does not pass muster to say that, we as a nonprofit value equity, and that's it. We need to have our protocols, our policies, being able to speak to how equity gets embedded within our projects and just talking about it from that really granular level. For those of you who have a lot of institutional donors, I would hazard a guess that you are answering this question when it comes to your grant proposals. And I would also hazard that more and more major donors are also going to ask for that when it comes to their annual renewal letters or in their annual meetings. So just be very cognizant of that. And I also just really want to emphasize language. So I'm not going to use all of the dehumanizing, othering terms that I've used personally as a fundraiser, but I'm just going to share at risk, marginalized, not meeting their potential, those with extensive, disadvantages. Just think about the language that we all see and that some of us may write. I know that I've written those words in e-appeals, in grant proposals, and reports. It's dehumanizing. So when we think about authentic equity, which again, I 100% could discuss just fundraising and equity for 4 hours. And I would still have maybe 10% of the answers at this very present point in time. I just really wanted to take a beat and to discuss equity with all of you. As I have at the bottom, when we think about our society and when we think about all the discussions that we're having very triggering, very trauma-laden discussions, and there's very much a tug of war. This has been going on for years, decades, more than a century, and let's not pretend that any of this is new. So when we think about how we as 501c3s can contribute to both latent injustice as well as paving a road for deeper opportunity for our constituents, clients, and communities, I just really wanted to have this in here. So again, I 100% don't have all the answers. Just checking my privileges, you see me, I have been in fundraising for a very long time. I absolutely do not know a lot of things. So I'd love to hear from you in chat. Please add in if you're comfortable. other components of fundraising and equity that you've explored or that you have questions about, or that's something that's on the radar or you've addressed and you're like helping lead the charge. I'd love to hear from you all. So please join in to chat if you feel comfortable. Similarly, let's talk about the status quo. Because I actually think that, discussions around equity and also status quo have a lot of linkages with each other. When we think about that decade ago, or, in some of our cases, those 2 decades ago, because I started fundraising in 2024, Pierre, I'm so sorry. I need to update my bio with you all. So when there's some of us who have been around for 20 years, we have that status quo. And we have those learnings of the status quo too. Today's donors have very different needs. Our clients have very different needs. Our organizations have very different needs. We have very different needs. So here's a little bit of mindset that I would suggest avoiding. And we'll move from sort of the deficit thinking to the opportunity thinking. Avoiding the we've always done it this way, instead repositioning it as let's try something new and fun and exciting because we've never done it before. Or let's really look at our storytelling and think about how our words can make our impact sing. That's another great way to really sort of reframe things. And then, I've been at different places where it's been let's avoid A/B testing, because if we have sort of our control messaging and then we have our test messaging, are we maybe leaving money on the table because this e-appeal won't net the same amount as this appeal? We need to test stuff out. So let's try out, sending out that e-appeal maybe on a Saturday morning, if it makes sense for you. Or just really, having that, really having that, growth mindset around, the various ways that we can think about how to test out our methodology and approaches. And then just again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. We sometimes can overemphasize donor communications channels that have a low ROI for us. So let's not be beholden to channels that we spend a lot of time on and that we may not be able to get what we deserve from it and what we need from it. I want to just talk about some great stuff in chat. So I have had conversations with board directors and even past students of mine when I was teaching around, well, what does the average donor look like? And when we think about what that average donor looks like and who they look like, there can be a mind's eye image. And that image can lead to, let's be honest, certain supremacist leanings. So when we think about missed opportunities, a really big missed opportunity is we may tailor some of our language towards a specific population and leave multiple other populations completely out of the equation around being able to invest and engage in our work. And that's genuinely a shame. So just want to say thank you for really, really insightful chat discussion going on right now that directly relates to so many conversations that I've been in and so many more that I have never been in, just checking my privilege. So, and then, yes, thank you, Pierre, for sharing with us all about the fall conference. Axelson's conferences are always amazing. Vu Lei was a keynote speaker at an Axelson conference several years ago, and this was before Vu Lei really sort of blew up on the national stage, and it was awesome listening to him speak. So just really great work. And then 100% love the most recent comment in chat, because there absolutely is like a little bit of a balancing act because we want to talk about like the needs and we want to make sure that we don't dehumanize. And so my suggestion would be, when we think about needs and sort of making the case for investing in our work, framing the needs as like situational around like, this is a current circumstance. Like these students uh, deserve to get to like grade level reading ability, or these families deserve to not live through food scarcity. That's been the approach that I've been taking. I definitely don't have it figured out, and I'd love for people to like add in a chat. What are some examples that people find effective to sort of have this like, tug and pull, because there can be a tension when it comes to fundraising and equity. And so let's recognize, that tension and respond to it. So please go ahead and like add in more into chat around fundraising and equity. I'd love to hear from folks. So, okay. Also being mindful of our time, I'm going to go ahead and think about, the new normal. Where do we want to be? Because here's the thing, so often we can feel as though we have these incredible headwinds that we're like walking into. Headwinds of philanthropy, headwinds of, the donors have, the power and we don't, and just like all of this sort of like, tug of war, push and pull, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The fact is that we don't really know where we're headed, but we all are amazing professionals. And my hope is that we can help steer the conversation in our own respective spheres by having those teachable moments with our board, with our CEO, if you're not currently a CEO, with our staff that we're hiring. Because one thing that's amazing for me, I've been able to hire some members of Gen Z, younger millennials, and the passion and like the thirst for like learning new things is very much there. So let's think about like, our stewardship of the sector. So that's sort of what I'm trying to get at. When we think about like, the fundraising mindset, that I would suggest that, we explore and potentially center in our own work, you know, think about these different pieces and think about how we can use them to be able to help create that new normal. Because, I've had a little bit of like, doom and gloom, like talking about like, individual giving statistics being lower and about like, magical fundraising unicorns and like, boards potentially doing board things at different times. Let's leave things on an uplifting note. And let's think about the change that we all personally can enact through our sector and our career, because we're all here as fundraisers for very clear reasons. So let's lean into that a little bit with some of this fundraising mindset, thinking about like, our confidence and ability to authentically implement and storytell, you know, devaluing that status quo from yesteryear that directly led to the lived circumstances of so many of our partner communities, clients, and constituents, and is really costing us when it comes to like opportunity and being able to share our story and work with so many amazing people who may be excluded from the table. So let's think about, making the table infinitely bigger. And how do we do that as fundraisers? Because we can do that. And we have a responsibility and a role in that. So yeah, I've shared a whole bunch. And in our final minutes with each other, I'd love to just hear, what you're doing that's new or that you're revisiting as we think about our new normal. Because there are so many policy changes, so many structural changes, so many societal changes that it's never going to be, 2000 again. It's never going to be 2010 again. It will never be 2019 again. So, what do we want the years ahead to look like? And how can we, as fundraisers, hire folks who will help us get to that new normal, keep them so that we can collaborate on that new normal with them? And then how do we all learn and grow and lean into those challenging conversations and test our assumptions so that way we can be more engaging with our donors? So I'd love to hear any final questions, any final lived experience, any pain points, tension points, opportunity points, uplifting points. Please share with me. And I'd like folks to go ahead and unmute if you feel comfortable, and please ask and share verbally at this time. Well, I tell you what, as people type in chat, I love it. As people type in chat, you've got my email. If you come back from this conversation, because we addressed some realness in this conversation, like make no mistake, we definitely had, some very honest, suggestions and dialogue and discussion and sharings in the chat. And some of those sharings like speak to a lot that's going on and a lot that has been going on. So let's let it percolate. Have some sugar, have some caffeine, have some carbs, and maybe send me an email. And I just love to hear any reactions that people have at this point as we move towards closing. There's some great points to ponder in chat. Any reactions that you have, any, hey Sid, we didn't cover this, I really wish that we had, or hey Sid, you glossed over this thing in one slide and it should have been 10 slides. I'd love any and all feedback at this time. And I'll go ahead and respond to the really great prompt that Pierre shared with us. When it comes to abundance, which I so love that term. And that term is a very emotional term, especially when we think about different communities and their lived experiences. And when we think about sort of the deficit that sometimes nonprofits feel that we're operating within, whether it's a deficit mentality or an actual deficit in our budget. Thinking about an abundance mindset can help us sort of reframe where let's think about it from an opportunity standpoint. Let's think about it as, there's room for growth. We aren't beholden to historical trends, and there's lots of opportunity in the new normal. All right. Well, thank you all for spending part of your morning with me and with the Axelson Center. Please follow up with me via email. I swear that I'm super approachable. I think you get that vibe. And I'm not going to disappear. I've been in Chicago for a very long time and plan on being here for a very long time still. So I look forward to crossing paths with all of you, whether it's at an AFP breakfast or at a Chicago Community Trust roundtable. If you see me out and about, if I don't say hi, please say hi too. So I appreciate you all. You're doing amazing work. You're being asked to do a lot. And I just want to end with saying that you and your work are exceptional.
So thank you. Thank you so much, Sid. And thank you all for participating with us today. I've just been curious about what people have been experiencing, some of the comments in the chat. I wish people would react to, because sometimes it's helpful for us to get a sense of what people are experiencing also. So if you can add any more to the chat, that would be great. But in the meantime, just want to thank you. Thanks Sydney for his insights and expertise. And just kind of reflecting, we've heard about red flags that might impede hiring or retention, some of the necessary practices that would be helpful. And Sid ended with a challenge to us to consider what we can personally do in a different way. So I suggest that we take this seriously, because we can make a difference ourselves, right? So please do give us your feedback. We have an evaluation think the link was put into the chat, and it also pops up as you are leaving Zoom. There's an opportunity to do it there. It's those kinds of comments that really help us in thinking about suggested speakers or just giving us feedback on different sessions. And we realize that folks are having Zoom fatigue. That's a real thing. We know that. But you can also give us suggestions about what might be helpful. You know, folks are also fatigued with breakout sessions, but we're trying to get people to engage. So what do you suggest that we do with that? So I don't see anything else that's come up in the chat yet that people want to give attention to, but Sid has given his email for folks to reach out if you have questions, or you can get back to us. So I will just say take care and hope you will join us at our 25th anniversary celebration on May 16th and our conference on October 18th. So take care and have a great day.